Hi, I'm Parish President Matt Jewell. I'm here with our Assessor Tab Troxler. We're doing a series of videos on how our local government works, and being that this year is a reassessment year, a year that's very important for the assessor, we decided to start with the assessor's office and what the assessor does. Mr. Troxler, thanks for being here today. Wanted to ask you a question about this year. Obviously, there's a lot of buzz going on. It's a reassessment year. People are getting letters in the mail. Talk to us about what is a reassessment and why do we do it? Who says that we have to do it?
Yeah, great question, Matt, and I know that residents have concerns. First, let's start off that it's a constitutional requirement, not just a law, but it's a constitutional requirement. Louisiana Constitution requires assessors to reassess properties at least once every 4 years. The last time we did a reassessment of the parish was back in 2016, thus being 4 years later, 2020, it's a reassessment period. I want to also say that I've heard from many residents concerned about COVID-19 and what's going on, and it was just really, really bad timing. Unfortunately, again, since it's a constitutional requirement, we cannot ignore it. And from the law standpoint, the law is completely blind to COVID-19 going on. So unfortunately, we had to do the reassessment this year. And additionally, it's probably one of the most notable or more notable reassessments we've ever had in parish history, because we are in a 4-year period of the strongest real estate market this parish has ever seen in its history. And that's both in terms of volume of properties being sold, but also in value.
Tell me a little bit about, folks are getting that letter in the mail. The value of their property has gone up compared to the last reassessment. What does that mean for the actual resident?
Yeah, and overall, it's a very good thing for the parish. I mean, it is a healthy reflection of what's going on here. When I have residents that are moving in from other areas of the state, including our nearby parishes that surround us, the number one thing they tell me is that we've got a good school system, we've got low crime, and a very responsive sheriff's office. And Matt, to your credit and to that of the parish council, they feel like this government serves its people well. So that is creating a want and desire to be here in St. Charles Parish, along with a strong national economy prior to COVID. That has created a great deal of demand. So what is occurring is that property values are rising, and the reassessment is based off of the actual market conditions. So as property values rise, so this means that individual residents are seeing valuation of an asset that they own, it is rising. Their asset, their net worth is actually increasing as these property values rise. Unfortunately, when that does happen, though, the assessor must recognize that increased value, and that increased value is then used to determine their overall tax burden when it comes to property tax, or ad valorem taxes, as sometimes we call it.
So Tab, tell us a little bit about what are property taxes? Is it property taxes on just your home? Is it property? Is it your car? I mean, explain to the residents about what it is exactly.
Yeah, and the history of property tax has been around for a long, long time. In fact, it's one of the first taxes ever devised. And of course, we're always here that, two things are always certain in life, death and taxes, and property tax is one of those. Sometimes you hear it referred to as ad valorem. And that's a good term, because what ad valorem means is each according to value. And so what a property tax is that we look at the value of property that individual owners and companies have. And there is a portion of their overall value then is taxed. And that's the tax rate. And those property taxes support local government. Now, I think that's one of the key misconceptions that I hear in the community is people say, well, the state must really want their money. The one thing I can assure the residents is that every dollar that's paid in property tax comes to local government functions, not just the parish president, but to the sheriff, to the school board, organizations like myself, the assessor, and they fund a lot of things. So we've got hospitals, we've got mosquito control, road lighting. So property tax is seen as a stable form of revenue for local government. None of the money, again, goes to the state, but it is the foundation of local government. It is the only tax that's typically local government only.
So Tab, we hear a lot about millages, and explain to us what exactly is a millage and who sets the millage rates?
Yeah, and it's a great question here because quite literally, a mill literally means 1/1000th. Now that's going to be important as I talk about how we calculate this and how mills are levied here within the state of Louisiana and here locally by our political subdivisions in St. Charles Parish. So there are a couple different steps within the process of coming to what we call an assessed value. And I want to take you through those steps. The assessor determines a fair market value first. In all processes, the assessor must come up with what we call the fair market value, which you as a homeowner would think of the value that you would be able to get from a buyer to purchase your home. That is the fair market value. And I think it's really important. I've been trying to remind residents, I don't determine the fair market value. You as a resident don't. The market does. It's a number of buyers and sellers coming together that determine what property values actually are. My role as the assessor is to simply go out into the market, look at the data, see what buyers and sellers are doing, and then we establish the fair market value. From there are 3 levels in the state of Louisiana called assessment levels. And what we do for homeowners is that their property has an assessment level of 10%. So we take your fair market value and we use 10% of that. That becomes your assessed value. If you happen to be a homeowner and this is your primary home, the state of Louisiana allows us to take $7,500 or in market value $75,000 off of your assessed value. And then the remaining is what becomes what we call the taxable value. And for every one of those thousands, so for every $1,000 of taxable value, 1 mill equals $1 for those. Or in our case right now, last year, we were a little bit more than 118 mills, which means that for every $1,000 of taxable value, a homeowner would pay $118 and change for all of the taxes that have been levied here.
You know, we just had a millage election, and a lot of residents have been talking about, you know, where these millages come from, where the millages are going, and who sets these millage rates. St. Charles Parish just recently lowered our millage rate with a vote of the council. But talk a little bit more about the taxing bodies in St. Charles Parish and how the millage rate is set.
Yeah, and I think what's really important is that out of the 118 plus mills we had for 2019, a very small amount, less than 10 mills, is what we call constitutional. It means that those mills are there regardless of what the voters say. Just 10. So that's less than 10% of all of the mills. The rest of them, you and I and the voters in general, at some point have approved those millages. They have approved them.
So what is the breakdown? I mean, so as parish government, I know I get the least amount of mills, but we have the sheriff's office, we have the school board, we have fire departments. Kind of give us the breakdown of the mills.
So in general, and these are very close percentages, but not exact, obviously. But I'm just going to give you a general consensus of where the money goes. So nearly 50% of all of the mills that are levied in St. Charles Parish are those levied by the school system. Some of those millages are constitutional. That, in other words, the Louisiana Constitution gives them the authority to levy a certain number of mills. Then the school system has levied additional mills beyond that for both operations, maintenance, and also capital improvements to build schools and other structures. So that's about 50% of all of the mills that we have here in St. Charles Parish. The sheriff, again, an approximate number, is his organization receives nearly about 25% of the overall millage. Now, the one thing I want to say about the sheriff's office, that is the only source of local tax revenue that the sheriff receives. He does not have any sales tax. And again, give or take a couple points, he's just shy of about 25% of the overall take from the property taxes revenue. And come to your organization last, being the parish as a whole, the parish council, the parish president. And there are a lot of organizations underneath when we say parish council, parish president. I think it's important to know that the parish receives about 25% of the revenue too, but I think it's important for voters to understand that you don't technically control it all. It comes under your organization, but the money does not go to the parish president or directly to the council. What the voters have done is that they have specified a number of mills to go to provide funding for certain activities. So there are millages for the library, which was one of the ones that were just recently renewed. There are millages that support the fire department. There are millages that support the hospital, that support recreation, that support the council on aging. These are all the different types of mills that voters have approved and said, yes, we want to fund these operations. It's under your umbrella as the parish, as the leader of the parish, but at the same time, you don't have the discretion. I think that's sometimes confusing to residents, that you can't take money from these other areas. A lot of times residents will say, well, the government needs to operate like my household, but in your household is typically one checkbook and money can be divvied up. Unfortunately, Mr. President, the problem you have is that all of these are dedicated funds. And so you by law, you're not allowed to move monies from the library or the hospital to cover drainage issues, which I know that's an important item for you. So, but just trying to give some information exactly how these things work. But that's generally the funding: 50% to the school system, 25% to the sheriff, and about 25% under the umbrella of the offices of the parish president, parish council.
Tab, a lot of folks have been talking about the homestead exemption. As you know, $75,000 hasn't changed in a long time. Can you talk a little bit about that? I think there may be some confusion that you set the homestead exemption. So can you just talk a little bit about the history of the homestead exemption and what role it plays with the assessment?
Yeah, the homestead exemption is a very important part in calculating anyone's taxable value, because the state of Louisiana, through our Constitution, this is another constitutional provision, allows $75,000 of anyone's, what we call the bona fide homestead, or the home in which they own and occupy, to be reduced from their taxable value. So if a home is worth $200,000 on the fair market between what buyers and sellers would pay, if you take away the $75,000, the taxable amount is only $125,000. Now, one of the things that's really being discussed, and I think it's a good discussion to have, is the homestead has not changed. This value was created nearly 40 years ago, $75,000. And over 40 years, homes have greatly increased in value. And nearly 90% of the homes in St. Charles Parish back in the early or the late 70s and early 80s were covered by homestead exemption. So 90% of the properties, homeowners paid zero in property tax. Since they've held that $75,000, and we've seen inflation, and we've seen the valuation of properties in St. Charles Parish grow, then what we've seen now is that people have taxable values much greater. They had zero liability 40 years ago, and now they have fairly substantial liabilities in terms of taxable value. So there's a great deal of discussion. Do we raise the homestead exemption? Should it be raised? It's a constitutional provision, so it will take the Louisiana legislature. That is who has the authority, not the assessor. I do not determine the homestead exemption value. I have no control over that, other than to have the same rights as any other citizens, which is to petition our state government to either increase it. Some people even suggest we even do away with it. So there are a number of different ideas and ideologies around the homestead exemption in terms of, is it needed? Should it be increased? Just some good discussion around that.
Yeah, so that's something that's potentially going to have to come from a constitutional convention of the state, or just a straight up change in the Constitution.
Yeah, you bring up a good point. So there's two ways that we can go about this. We can get a constitutional amendment to change the amount, so we can lower it, raise it. There's been several bills out there to say, let's let the parish vote to change it themselves, which I think is a good constitutional amendment. So it would allow our voters here to determine if they want to raise or lower the constitutional amendment, the homestead exemption. But we would need a constitutional amendment to do that. And the other way is what you mentioned. If there was a constitutional convention then the whole of the Constitution becomes available and adjustments can be made. And that's a time that we can consider, again, lowering or raising it as the residents feel necessary.
So Tab, as you know, St. Charles Parish has an older demographic. Is there anything that your office can do to help residents who might be on fixed income or might be receiving the majority of their income from Social Security?
Sure. Matt, the Louisiana legislature has provided a tool for that, and that's called our special level freeze for those residents who are age 65 and older. There is an income requirement, though. $77,030 is the income requirement that you must be at or below for your adjusted gross income on your IRS 1040 form for 2020. When you apply for this, you're not exempted from taxes. What it does, however, is that it does prohibit the assessor, myself and my staff, from increasing the value. So if fair market value goes up on your property, your assessed value should come up as well. What the special level freeze does is to stop the value from increasing over time. So the idea is that in doing so, it will help contain increases in the future. One special note I should make: if additional taxes are levied, it will not prevent that or those homeowners from having to pay the additional taxes. It only freezes their value for taxation purposes.
Tab, what would happen in 4 more years if the reassessment would go down? Would that freeze level go to that new lower level?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So yes, anytime that your value goes down, and that does happen, the law does not allow us to simply go back up. So if the homeowner's value falls and they do have the special level freeze, we will have to freeze them at the lower amount. And that's a lifetime thing. You only have to come in and qualify one time. You do not have to qualify each year. So some people will say, well, but my income may be more next year. It doesn't matter. If you meet the criteria this year, you will have it for life. So long as you don't sell your home, you will have it for life.
And residents who are wishing to receive this benefit from your office, how do they apply?
Yeah, so you need to come to the assessor's office. Unfortunately, I like to do as much service as I can via the internet and other forms, to reach out and make it easy on residents. This is a requirement, though. You must come to the office and fill out a form. You must attest to the fact that you're age 65. You will have to prove to us that you're age 65, and you also will have to share with us your most recent IRS filing on your 1040. We got to look at the adjusted gross income, and you must meet the requirement of $77,030.
As you know, this year has been a crazy year with very severe weather. We did experience some flooding in May and again in July. Those residents are rebuilding their homes. Some of them have flooded multiple times. What can your office do to help those folks with the assessment or their property taxes?
Well, first off, I'm sorry to hear. I know that it's been a very difficult year, particularly for those homeowners who some of them flooded, like you said, not only once, but twice. We are fortunate. There's a law out there, 1978.1, that allows the assessor, when a disaster occurs and a person uses or loses the loss of their property, that I can come in and do a special assessment of their property for that year. It does require them to be impacted. So what we've done is we reached out to those homeowners that have been impacted because of these floods and because of the weather events that have occurred. And what we were able to do was offer them at least 50% off of the value of their home. So we find fair market value, and then we take off 50% of that value in order to figure out what their taxable value is, and then we go through the normal process of calculating their taxes. For the residents who have actually had the misfortune of being impacted twice, we've actually taken off 75%. One of the questions, though, that I have from some residents is that they lived in an area that has seen a great deal of flooding, and they are living in an area in which their neighbors have flooded. However, they themselves have not flooded. And so they're coming to the office to say, well, since my neighbors have flooded and you've offered them some relief, I'm in a flooded area, could you offer me some relief on my property values? And unfortunately, the law is very specific And so it must be properties that were actually impacted. Now, when we make that change to reduce their values, 50 and 75% in this particular instance, we are not making a judgment on the market. So that's why residents who have not been impacted but live in that area, we cannot change their values because we're not saying we believe that the overall market has changed. And it may. And over time, we may see that market go down or up because of the flooding. But it is exactly why I cannot offer everyone in the community some type of lower value. That must come from buyers and sellers, considering those events and whether or not that's going to change the overall market value. But for those impacted, we certainly can, and we do apply the law. And I want to let you know, and I want to let our residents know, we have applied that law to the fullest extent to provide relief. It will no way cover for the expenses that they have had. And that's not what this is about. It's simply recognizing that they've been through a disaster. We have a law on the books, and as your assessor, I want to make sure our residents get the benefit of that law.
I think that's a great thing that you're doing. I know our offices have worked closely, planning and zoning, EOC, and your offices to identify those houses that flood. Tell me a little bit about the process of your office going out. You know, I saw your employees out checking on those homes and identifying those homes that flooded as well. Can you tell us a little bit about the process of when that happens and what your office has to do to identify those homes?
Yeah, one of the things I think is great. You and I have a good relationship, and we have been since you've come to office, and I want to thank you for that. And this is a good example of where our relationship and a relationship between the assessor's office and the other offices of great benefit to the parish. As you already stated, the Emergency Operations Center, your Department of Emergency Preparedness and Homeland Security, were already actively in the field and seeking out residents who have had damage. You've had other folks from planning and zoning. And so the great news for the residents is that we work together. And so my staff went straight to the Emergency Operations Center. We started working with the GIS department to identify the areas that have been impacted. I did send a number of field personnel out there to kind of go verify the areas that indeed were impacted. While I'm strongly supportive of applying this benefit to residents who have been impacted, we wanted to make sure we didn't just throw a couple extra homes in there. But I think the great news is for residents, in doing so, it took the burden off of residents. Many residents didn't have to, they didn't have to call and talk to us. If they've talked to you, they've talked to me. We took that. We went verify. So I think that's a great benefit because as an individual resident, I hate when I have to go to the parish government or state government or the federal government to basically do their job for something I think they already know. And in this particular case, we knew the damages from working with you and sent my personnel out there. We've identified it, and all of this is to make it easy on a homeowner.
So what is the overall tax roll value, and how does that relate to the different taxing bodies in the parish?
It's a very important question because while we each individually know our assessed value and taxable value and the taxes due, from the assessor standpoint, I've got to look across all areas. So when we talk about the overall tax roll, we're talking about the tax roll that's being generated by commercial property, industry, and residential. And by the way, in this community, 89% of the entire tax roll, and thus its revenue that's derived from it, is from industry and commerce. We as residents actually only put up 11% of the overall revenue in this parish, at least when it comes to property tax. So the tax roll is really important. And this year, we will have the largest tax roll value in the history of St. Charles Parish. It's over $1.7 billion. It is the 8th largest tax roll. There are 64 parishes in the state of Louisiana. We have the 8th largest tax roll within the state. One of the things I like to kid people on is that we can sell St. Charles Parish, at least according to the tax roll, buy East Jefferson, and have some extra money to go down and buy Grand Isle. That's one way of kind of looking at it. We have a larger tax roll than Ascension Parish, who certainly have more residents than us, and they have industry, but our tax roll is even more valuable than Ascension Parish. We're more valuable than Rapides Parish with the city of Alexandria. So again, we have the 8th largest, or in terms of value there, with the tax roll. Now, the other question about the tax roll is then, how does that value fit into revenue. Well, the way this works is that as the assessor, I provide a value to the taxing organizations every year. So I provide a value to your staff, to the school board, to the sheriff. That value in this year's $1.7 billion is what guides these individual taxing authorities to know what mills they need to levy. Now, they're authorized to levy a mill that's the voters have approved, but they do not have to always authorize the highest of that. They could, even though they authorize to maybe levy 5 mills, you can choose, and much like the parish council and yourself have done, y'all chose to levy a lesser tax. And you were able to do that and still operate parish government because the overall tax roll has increased. And I think going forward, I think that's what the residents really need to know. If we want to bring about lower tax rates, you really need to talk to the taxing organizations. You need to take a look at, is the tax roll growing? And if the tax roll is growing, it's just my opinion, but I think that we can see a decline in the overall taxes that are levied, which are the millages. And I want the public to know, though this is a very small amount because my millage is very, very small, but I am levying the lowest mills in the history of the office.
Wow.
And so I have reduced my tax rates year by year, last year and then again this year.
Well, you bring up a good point, and I completely agree with you. As our tax rolls are growing and our millage rate is staying pretty consistent, I think it'd be prudent for not only parish government but other taxing bodies in the parish to reassess what we're doing and what we actually need, and start giving that relief to the residents. I know we've talked on numerous occasions about being able to still look at inflation and lowering that millage rate as the total ad valorem of the parish goes up. So I think that's some more conversations we need to have, and talking with residents and the other taxing bodies about ways where we can lower the tax obligation of residents and industry while also still maintaining a very, very healthy revenue from those millages.
Yeah, and that's, and I want the public to know that you and I have been engaged. The minute you decided to run, I think within weeks you came to my office. We had a very long and lengthy meeting. We've talked a great deal about taxes, tax rates, and I appreciate your support. And you've been very helpful since you've been in office. And I think you and I see it the same way, that we want to make sure that our public agencies are funded, but at the same time would like to see a little bit of decrease in the tax burden. And I think it's good for us long term, because we want to have good schools. You want to have a good sheriff's office, and you want to have a responsive government. And I'm hearing that from residents who are moving in. They're saying, hey, you guys have these things, which is why I'm moving from Jefferson. I'm moving from Orleans because y'all have a better quality of life. But at the same time, to continue that quality of life, just like you and I have been talking since the very beginning, we need to take a look at where we can minimize government spending and find efficiencies and help lower the burden on the taxpayer. And I think that's great, and I appreciate your support in doing so.
So Tab, tell me a little bit about what the assessor's office does. Obviously, we know this year is focused on reassessment, but in a non-reassessment year, talk a little bit about what your staff is working on.
Yeah, I always enjoy bringing in residents to the office, and I think when we give them a tour and show them all that we do, most of them are like, I had no idea what all the assessor offices does. So just think about it in terms of just residential property. Every time a property changes hands in this parish, my office is responsible for finding out who pays the taxes on it. So there's not a square inch of the parish that I'm not concerned about, because everything from residents, commercial, industry, and even assets on the river, boats that are actually literally moving up and down the river, if they're here on January 1, and it's not those involved in international trade, but those that are local, if they're here in St. Charles Parish on January 1, we have the authority to tax them. So there's a lot that goes on. So let me just give you some examples I think that people probably don't know about the assessor's office. Every one of the 27 major chemical plants and refineries, which basically is 89% of our overall tax value, those industries have to be valued. And it is my office that determines the value of the Shells, the Dows, the Bears, IMTT, you name it, Occidental. All of these companies and their sites here, we value them. One of the unique things we also have, we have a company here called IMTT, which is located in St. Rose. So not only do we value that site, but I don't think the public realizes this. They hold inventory for literally over several dozen different companies. Some companies like BP have no other asset in the parish other than they have material stored in tanks at IMTT. The assessor's office is responsible for valuing that inventory. That inventory can be oil, fuel, there's even cooking oil. One of the other ones that we have, I think, is of interest, and my staff has to value it as well, is there's an alcoholic beverage warehouse that's here in St. Charles Parish, and it has millions of dollars of inventory in terms of alcoholic beverages that, for consumption. And so we have to value that. When we go into businesses, this is what we call personal property. So let's just take a restaurant, because everyone's familiar and at least been to one of our fine restaurants here in the parish. But we have to value the grill that they cook your food on. We have to value the utensils that you eat with. We value the chairs, the drink machine, the refrigerator, all of that, and including all of the food items. That's called inventory. All of that has to be valued within the parish. So there's a great deal of complexity to be an assessor in St. Charles Parish. I have to know something about boats and ships on the river and barges. I have to know something about chemical facilities. I also have to know a lot about commodity pricing.
Right.
So I think I enjoy it. That's one thing I want the residents to know. I enjoy this job very much. It's a very challenging job. I love being in St. Charles Parish. Been here all my life, and it is sometimes it's a challenge to be the assessor. And of course, not only just for this year for reassessment, but all of the demands that's required upon us.
Yeah, obviously a very complex job when you look at all of the different industries and the different things moving across the parish. So thank you for all that you're doing. Obviously, all of that stuff is a huge benefit to St. Charles Parish, and thanks for what you do with that. If folks want to get in touch with the assessor's office, what's a good way to contact you all?
First off, at stcharlesassessor.com. That is a wealth of information, and so I want to encourage residents, if you haven't been to stcharlesassessor.com, do so. You can get a lot of information about just what you and I have talked about. What is the role of the assessor? What exactly does my office do? We've got a special website built right now internally to that. Talks all about the reassessment information. So the first thing I want to do, www.stcharlesassessor.com. If you have additional or very specific questions, I would encourage you to call us, 985-783-6281, and you can always reach us via email as well.
Well, Tab, I just want to thank you for coming in today and having this discussion with me. I think this is a great segment that we're going to be doing with local government. I appreciate our good working relationship and look forward to continue to work with you in the future.
We do, and I appreciate you having me, and I appreciate your support.